Okay, so we're in the early hours of the 5th of January, and my goodness, what a baptism of fire this new year has had, this new decade has had, with the killing of Qassem Suleimani by US drone. Understandably, this has dominated the headlines. I actually was wondering why it wasn't on the papers on Friday, only to realize it had actually happened on Friday morning, and that's why it hadn't been covered. So already it being like but sometimes I miss events. Obviously, they're published the next day, and I think like, what's the time scale of that? And that was the issue. It actually happened that morning. There's a lot of things to be said around this. Few disclaimers of sorts. This is obviously still an ongoing development. There are aspects to this which are still being reported, and I don't intend to go into every single detail. The Middle East is a maze inside an enigma inside a puzzle. It's a very, very complex place. And so it's curious or an interesting fact that people get such strong views over it because it is so complex. There is not very much about the Middle East which is black and white. There are some things that are black and white, but not much. Nevertheless, if you follow politics, if you follow geopolitics, it's impossible not to have some opinions on this. So, what I want to do here is lay out not only my own thoughts, but I actually think there's been roughly three responses. And I want to look at those responses a little bit as I see them. This is just my opinion, you don't have to agree. I will leave the comment section open, but I don't have to respond to abuse or put up with it myself. That just goes without saying. You know, it's a new decade now, it's a fresh start. I'm not going to shy away from controversial subjects like this, but I'm not going to, I don't want to get into a sort of into the gutter with people if that's the sort of angle they're going to take. But I won't block comments. Okay, so this is the three sort of responses as I see them. Incidentally, talk of Gulf War Three and World War Three, the latter especially, I think is hyperbole, although it's always tempting to make an assumption that something like this could be a prelude to such a situation. But I don't think it will result in World War Three for a simple reason, and that is that as it stands, this directly involves just two countries, the United States, well, three countries, the United States, Iran, and Iraq. Iraq because that's where it took place, Iran because the target was obviously a top Iranian general and the United States. They carried out this action, or rather, the Trump administration carried out the action. So, to be a world war, it would need to involve other powerful players like Russia, China, and other great powers. And as it stands, this is more directly an Iran America issue. But that doesn't mean that the rest of the world isn't seriously concerned. Um, So there's a sequence of events that seem to have triggered this. The American actions against this Iranian-backed militia in Iraq, the PDF, the factional forces, I believe it's called the Rasht. My Farsi is sketchy, but I believe that's the name it also goes by, which is sort of a confederation of different groups active in the region, but backed by Iran. The Americans carried out an airstrike on their fighters in retaliation for an attack on Iraq's Greenstone, which killed, I understand, an American contractor. So, in retaliation for that retaliation, New Year's Eve, pro-Iranian mob attacked the U.S. embassy, and thankfully no one was killed, but it showed the strength of feelings there are. Um, so, in retaliation for that, Trump made this executive order to target Qassem Soleimani. And it's emerged today that apparently in the Brown administration here in the UK, David Miliband, then Foreign Secretary, called back an SAS initiative that they had Soleimani in crosshairs, and he called that off. So it's not the first time this man has been targeted by the West. Um, I've just come across a report about the actress Rose McGowan defending the Iranian regime. She claims she isn't. I'll come back to that because I think it's grotesque. But anyway, laying out the three positions, I think we can look at there's the obvious hardline one, which someone would say is a neocon position, and someone mistakenly referred that to being my position. That is those who hate the Iranian regime and strongly support President Trump's executive action in ordering this drone strike against Soleimani. They argue it's justifiable retaliation for the attack on the US embassy and point out that many in the region welcomed it as Soleimani was responsible for the deaths of thousands by funding these and supporting these militia groups that killed American service personnel as well as countless civilians. And Soleimani was the face of one of the world's most grotesque regimes. That's a fact. It is also a fact that this happened in Iraq, and whilst the Iraqis may claim a sovereignty issue with that, this wasn't a response to an American mob storming the Iranian embassy. This was an Iranian or pro Iranian mob attacking the American embassy. Soleimani wasn't killed on Iranian soil, so this can't be called an attack on Iran's sovereignty. It didn't happen in Iranian soil. So that's an important basic point that needs to be considered. This was not an attack on Iranian sovereignty. Second point, or the second sort of faction, is those who hate or at least have no empathy with the Iranian regime, but have legitimate concerns that rather than eliminating a destabilizing force in the region, this action will only inflame tensions and push Washington and Tehran closer to outright war. This may include many in the Iranian diaspora who hate the mullahs and the theocracy, but understandably they don't want to see a war in their homeland or a conflict involving their homeland. I probably veer towards that faction, and I'll come back to that. Then there's a third group, and again, this is very, very roughly speaking. It's obviously there's grey areas. The third group, those who are vociferously critical of American power and who will always, always oppose American foreign policy, and more often than not, by extension, British foreign policy, regardless of the context. People, for example, in this country, Jeremy Corbyn, in America, Bernie Sanders, there are people who will almost always predictably criticize the West first, regardless of the context, because they believe it's all a big neocon project. The evil warmongers are out to get oil, and it's as simple as that. So, not surprisingly, these are the same people who decried the deaths of bin Laden and Baghdadi and who will actively serve as propagandists for any failed dictatorship as long as it's anti-West. So they're not really pacifist. They pretend to be pacifist, but they're not. You know, the Stop the War coalition in this country, for example, claim that they're peaceniks, but they've actively supported and pushed the propaganda of the Assad regime, which I find utterly repulsive. Um, and you know, what's interesting about this faction is it attracts both far left and far right. It attracts the far left who likes the socialist work and the Stop the War coalition, but there are some on the far right as well who advocate an isolationist approach, but are also admiring of the likes of Vladimir Putin. Um, so this faction will decry American military involvement in the region, but ignore Iranian military involvement in the region and Iran's presence across the region. So, like I say, of course, there's going to be a lot of grey area with this. It's not, I'm not crudely saying you have to belong to one of these three factions. Um, but that's broadly speaking as I see it. And I myself, like I said, I veer towards the second part. I certainly won't be crying over Soleimani. I consider Iran to have engaged in state terrorism in the region. And I find it absolutely repulsive when people go out of their way to defend this regime. I can understand people being critical of Trump. I can understand people even protesting this action. And in a democracy, they're entitled to. But when you have an idiot like Rose McGowan, and I'm not sure yet if I'll make a separate video about that, which is why I'm amalgamating it into this, who actually says she would, that Americans like her are living under a terrorist regime with no choice of escape. It's grotesque. That is an insult to people who live under actual dictatorships. And if a regressive left idiot like Rose McGowan really believes that, then she needs to get the hell out and go to Iran. I really believe that. I'm sick and tired of regressive leftists defending grotesque regimes. I'm not talking about everyone on the left. I'm talking about those people who, they're absolutely, they have no right to call themselves pacifists. They're not taking a pacifist position. Supporting dictatorships who torture their own people is not a pacifist position. It's just not. And it's a skewed way of thinking that they have kind of convinced themselves that everything America does is all about oil. So, um, it's all a CIA plot. It's all about oil. So their opponents must be the good guys. And they narrow down geopolitics to this black and white goodies and baddies mentality. And then they have the audacity to say that those of us who are trying to just observe the situation, trying to trying to educate ourselves, that we are the reactionaries. So I don't know where this is going to go. I hope things don't escalate. But my reluctance to criticize Trump's action is on this basis. Can any leader in the world watch their embassy being attacked and stand by and do nothing? Can any American president stand by, particularly in an election year, and watch an American embassy attacked and just be passive about it? I just offered to sit down with a nice cup of tea with those who done it. That's ridiculous. Now, it might well be opportunism on the part of Trump. It might well be a way to deflect from his impeachment. That's, politics is a dirty game. That's very plausible. Some have pointed out that when Clinton was impeached, um, he ordered strikes on the facility in Sudan, the Al Qaeda or purported Al Qaeda facility in Sudan. So it may well be a very cynical form of trying to detract from that. But even if it is, the idea that an American president should do nothing when an American embassy is attacked is ridiculous. Do the people who take that position, do they really think the Iranians would stand by if, say, the Iranian embassy was attacked in Paris or London? I doubt it. So there's a lot of hypocrisy in that position. This is one of those things that people who aren't prepared to be open-minded about it, they're going to either be forcefully defensive of Trump, and I'm not. I've been critical of Trump in many ways. I'm critical of the fact that he didn't inform Boris Johnson, for example, even though there's British troops deployed in the region. I'm critical of the fact that Trump conducts foreign policy by Twitter. I'm very critical of a lot of things Trump does. But the other side of it is those who will, like I say, just blindly defend the Iranian regime because they're enemies of the United States. They must be the good guys. They must be the anti imperialists. They're progressive. This is absolutely grotesque and demonstrates an extreme ignorance of what is actually the situation in that country. And they say things like, oh, the Iranian people are such great people and such an ancient civilization. But the issue is not against the Iranian people and it's not against Iranian culture, at least not that ancient culture. I would argue it's the 40-year-old Islamist theocracy that has damaged Iran's ancient heritage far more than anything else. But that's not, that the facts get in the way of emotional sentiment against the West because that is what we're seeing. Um, so you can think of me what you will. You can say I'm a neocon. You can say I'm X, Y, and Z. It comes with the territory of this sort of issue. But those who are protesting because they believe it will escalate the situation, I can understand that. But those who are protesting because they're portraying Iran as the good guys, they're either being willfully ignorant or they're just willfully pushing the propaganda of the Iranian regime. This is not a pacifist regime. This is a regime that has been fueling conflicts in the region, fueling insurgencies, not least the brutal war in Syria that claimed so far 500,000 lives. So the idea that Iran is pacifist or innocent is utterly grotesque. You know, not just what it does to its own people, not just the fact it has one of the world's most brutal human rights records, but what it does in the region. This idea Brave Iran is standing up against the American superpower. Oh, how noble they are. It's absolutely grotesque because it is such a distortion of the facts on the ground. Majid Nawaz made a very good point about this, that a lot of those who are rushing to defend Iran know very little about the situation. They know very little about how the Iranian regime works. Um, so this is obviously something that's going to take a lot of media attention. Um, I hope it doesn't escalate further. I certainly don't think it will be World War III, but there is a very real possibility of a third Gulf War. But it shouldn't be timed from this point. It should be timed from the point when an Iranian mob attacked the American embassy. Let's not forget there are civilian consular staff in there whose lives could have been at risk had that not been put under control. Was that mob going there to, have a nice little debate over some coffee? No, they were going there with violent intentions. So it's just a testimony to the high security there that there wasn't fatalities.